Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Tuesday, April the 22nd, 2025. The big news is that Pope Francis has died, and that is a major event. Even though I'm not a Catholic, I very much feel it. He is part of a collective. The Catholic Church is a big part of a collective, and so one feels it, and it is something I want to comment on. And he died on Monday, April the 21st at 7:35 a.m. in the Vatican City, and I want to look at his death. I have looked at his chart fairly recently in the context of his illness. I didn't think it was right to speculate about his death at the time. I think when you're dealing with popes and kings, astrologers, do have to be a little bit careful about making death predictions. Sorry, not just popes and kings, queens, those kinds of people. But now that he's dead, I think it's okay to look at the chart of his death and to consider, what was going on in his chart and what transits there were, looking at his previous solar return. But before I look at Pope Francis, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Tuesday, April the 22nd, 2025. Have to ask, if you do happen to like this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to indeed like it. And if you're not a subscriber, I would be very happy to have you as a subscriber, because apparently it makes a difference. The more subscribers I get, apparently, the more people watch my channel. So anyway, let's look at what's going on today. So here is the chart for noon today, set for New York. Noon today, because being Tuesday. And so the moon is in Aquarius at 22 degrees 30 Aquarius, New York time. And so moon continues to be in a Saturn-ruled sign, but an air sign. So this may say something about what we think, what we believe in, our ideas. And there may be, to an extent, a feeling of optimism, because the moon is trine Jupiter. So, moon in Aquarius, trine Jupiter in Gemini. So some of us may start to see new possibilities, and we may look at something that we've seen 100 times before and always been a bit doubtful about it. But when we look at it again, maybe we see an opportunity there which we just hadn't previously been aware of. Now, the moon doesn't just make a trine to Jupiter, it also makes a square to Uranus. So moon square Uranus is an aspect that could be a little bit disruptive, and if there is any disruption, it might be because some people are just not prepared to give ground. Moon in Aquarius can be about ideas. Aquarius can be about stubbornness. It also, being Uranus, has a revolutionary element to it, and so each of us might want to have our own private revolution, but can these private revolutions coexist in the same space? And the sun, here's the sun at 2 degrees 46 Taurus, is making a 36-degree aspect to Saturn. Now, 36 degrees, it's a minor aspect, but 36 degrees is 1/10 of a circle, and so it's very much about the number 10. 5 times 2 equals 10. 5 times 2, well, why 5 times 2? Well, 5 represents what we are trying to create with our own will. So if Sun and Saturn have a 5 relationship, it could be that some of us are trying to create order. But this is a 10 relationship, 5 times 2, and the number 2 is about opposition and conflict and struggle So some of us may feel that we are struggling to create order. We have an idea about the way things should be, the way we'd like to organize our lives, the way we'd like to establish our authority, but it's not entirely easy. It really has to be fought for. And so that might be something that we're working with. And so that's actually pretty much it. There aren't really any other direct major aspects, though there is a T-square involving Sun, Mars and Pluto. And this is actually the main event of Tuesday. And so you can see that Mars is opposition Pluto, but it's not quite opposition Pluto. It's still got a couple of degrees to go. And the Sun is halfway between a square of Mars and a square of Pluto. So we could say that the Sun is on the Mars-Pluto midpoint. And, you get midpoints all the time. But when you've got a midpoint that involves a T-square, I think that could be a serious event. In fact, before I saw that Pope Francis had died, I was going to look at Sun on the Mars-Pluto midpoint in this video, but I decided to change the topic. Maybe I'll look at Sun on the Mars-Pluto midpoint in my video for Wednesday, because it's still going to be around. And a few people did get impacted by it, but maybe I'll mention them later in the video. And so what does it mean for the Sun to be on the Mars-Pluto midpoint? So, for example, if we look at Alfred Witter in his rules for planetary pictures, he says Sun on the Mars-Pluto midpoint, he writes schedule of the day, the man who serves the civil administration. I mean, I don't really get that. I don't think that is a great interpretation. Though we must defer to Witter and his colleagues' wisdom. Maybe it's about putting a lot of effort into creating one's schedule, into being hyper-organized. Possibly. That's something I would have missed. That's not what I would have immediately thought of when looking at Sun on the Mars-Pluto midpoint. But then you might say, well, Mars-Pluto is about control, and what is a good way to control things? Well, it may be about creating a routine, but a particular routine, the kind of routine you want. Now, Reinhold Epperton, in combination of stellar influences, he also looks at this midpoint, and he writes, a hard-working person, the ability to work till collapse or complete breakdown, injury, accident, violent measures, an upset or shock caused through the intervention of higher power. Now, of course, we've had the shock of Pope Francis dying. Of course, that was yesterday. That was on Monday. But the Sun was still on the Mars-Pluto midpoint, and when I look at the chart for the moment that Pope Francis, died, we'll be able to see how this T-square, fits in with it all. So there is something rather tough about Sun on the Mars-Pluto midpoint, and this whole T-square. We're having to really push ourselves, or we might feel that we're being pushed, and it might be a little bit of an effort to maintain our identity, to make sure that we're not sort of overwhelmed by everything going on around us. So that's the picture for New York. There will be a slight difference if we set the chart for Sydney. So if we set the chart for Sydney, Australia, as a representative of Australasia and East Asia, the moon is earlier in the sign. It's at 14 Sagittarius. 14 Aquarius. It's still making the trine to Uranus, not making so much of a square to let me say it again. The moon is making a trine to Jupiter, and it's making a square to Uranus. But that square to Uranus is somewhat distant. So some of the obstinacy of moon square Uranus, if you are in Australia or New Zealand, you might not pick up on it, and that might be more about tomorrow or very late in the day. And then there is the heliocentric viewpoint. So looking at the planets from a view of the sun, putting the sun at the center of the solar system. And this T-square is still in operation. Remember, this is a heliocentric T-square. Mercury opposition Jupiter and Mercury square Neptune. It's beginning to fade a little, but I think it's still in operation. And so, with this T-square, we are trying to be optimistic. I mean, that's Mercury square Neptune. But the question is, are we, strictly speaking, being realistic? Some of us might have ideas which just have no real possibility of actually happening in real life. Or you might just say, Jupiter square Neptune is about faith and believing that things can be better. And there's nothing wrong with faith, provided it has some basic grounding in reality. It doesn't have to have complete grounding in reality, but it's okay to have faith. We just don't want to take it too far. And also we have the Earth making a square to Pluto. So that Earth-Pluto square was closer yesterday, but it's still around. And so Earth square Pluto, it kind of links up with what I was saying about that T-square when you had Sun on the Mars-Pluto midpoint, and that geocentrically, the issues of power and control. And if you take Vitter's view, trying to organize one's routine in one's own way, not in someone else's way. And so Earth square Pluto, it emphasizes this. It emphasizes the importance of power and control. So those are a few thoughts about the heliocentric view. Chiron is semi-sextile Saturn. It's relatively close, but it's been around for a few days, perhaps longer than that. Chiron semi-sextile Saturn can be the struggle to be different when we're up against major conforming pressures. That might be how some of us feel it. So those are a few thoughts about the heliocentric view. And now I want to look at things from the perspective of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Tuesday, April the 22nd, 2025. Aries, you're feeling not too bad. You are able to integrate with the world around you, and when dealing with other people, you can be sociable, and you can do the right things. I don't think you're going to cause too much of an upset, provided nothing serious is at stake. I mean, after all, the moon is trine Jupiter, so moon trine Jupiter is quite a gentle aspect, especially for you. You're going to be able to move from person to person, group to group, and you have a chance to sort of rekindle contacts. So if you've fallen out with anyone or lost touch with someone, now with that moon trine Jupiter, you may be able to reconnect, and it won't be too much of an effort. You won't be struggling what to say or what to do, and you'll just come over as being someone who by and large is fairly easygoing, provided nothing is at stake. Now, if something is at stake, it could be a different picture, because Mars is applying to an opposition to Pluto. Now, that Mars-Pluto opposition, Mars in Leo opposition Pluto in Aquarius, it's a couple of days away, but it gets brought into focus by the Sun. So you've got Sun square Mars, Sun square Pluto, and there might be certain things that you take really seriously, that you are absolutely not prepared to compromise on. And if you are challenged, you are not going to give any ground whatsoever. And there's a reminder here that Mars is in Leo. Leo is a very proud sign, and of course it is a fixed sign, and it's opposition Pluto. And so what might we be talking about? Things that are important to you, perhaps things which have a creative nature, things you like doing, and right now you might really like doing them. You're going to do them, and you're not going to allow anyone to get in your way. And so if you're told what to do, then you're not going to take kindly to that at all, and you're going to really hold your ground. And there's even a possibility that you might take things too far, particularly if money's involved, because the Sun in Taurus is making a square to Mars, and that Sun square Mars was exact yesterday or late on Sunday, but still it's around. And so where there's money, there is a possibility of an argument. If someone points out the financial consequences of your actions, then you might not take kindly to that kind of criticism. But you should consider the financial consequences of your actions. Everything does have a financial consequence at the moment, because the Sun is in Taurus. So Aries, try, if you possibly can, to be receptive to a little bit of criticism, provided that criticism is constructive. Though in general, Aries, your creativity at the moment really is important, and to an extent it's worth fighting for. And indeed, you might want to be fighting for other people's creativity, other people's freedom. Freedom does matter to you, and that's something that is just an integral part of who you are at the moment. Turning to the subject of relationships, I would have said that right now, close relationships, one-to-one relationships, aren't particularly emphasized, I would have said. I think it's more about how you relate to people on a social collective level rather than one-to-one. Still, Venus is getting closer and closer to Saturn. In the next couple of days, Venus will be making a conjunction to Saturn, and so it's important to pay close attention to the people that are really important to you. Try to work out what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and what they're holding back. And something is going on. It's very easy, isn't it, to think that you are the only one who is thinking, you are the only one who's worrying, and one can forget that someone else is deep in thought and has strong feelings. And however well you know someone, you don't know really what they're thinking and feeling. And that is that great mystery that we will never know the answer to. But do make an effort, because there are things going on in another person's mind and in another person's heart that you probably should be aware of. Taurus, you probably can have a reasonably successful Tuesday. You certainly want to be successful, and since the beginning of a week, you felt that really there were things to do, and you might have felt that you did not have all the time in the world, and at first it might have been hard work. But now, with the moon making a trine to Jupiter, it might feel that things are getting just a little bit easier, that you are seeing some progress. And if you try something, if you give it a go, then it's quite possible that things are just going to be a lot easier than expected. So don't assume a conflict. Don't assume that everything is going to be difficult. And if money is an issue for whatever reason, it may work itself out, perhaps in a surprising way. But if money is conceivably available, then you may be able to get hold of it. And now might be a good time to be thinking about how you can get more money. And if you're working, pay rise is a possibility, or if you feel you should be earning more money or making more money, there could be a way to find a solution to that issue. And you will be helped by the moon making a trine to Jupiter. The moon also makes a square to Uranus, and that moon square Uranus could bring to the surface, something of a stubborn streak. The sun is in Taurus; it's in your sign, so perhaps that emphasizes, the Taurian side of your personality. And when the sun makes a square to Uranus, when the moon makes a square to Uranus, you're prepared to really be stubborn, because some things are worth being stubborn about. Other things are just not really worth it at all. So perhaps, Taurus, you have to consider what you're going to argue about. What your fights are about. Are these fights really worth the effort? And does it need to come to a conflict? It may be that you can be stubborn and determined without necessarily involving anyone else. And maybe you shouldn't be involving other people, because I think when it comes to the important issues, you may find today, Taurus, that other people are not useful at all. I'm not talking about your friends or partners, people you might be married to, for example. I'm talking about more generally the people you meet, the contacts you have. It just might not be very fulfilling. You try to reach out to people, you try to get attention, but it doesn't seem to work. Maybe other people are preoccupied. Maybe for one reason or another you're creating the wrong impression, or people just aren't especially receptive to your message. But that shouldn't worry you. This is a subtlety, and what matters, Taurus, is that you take advantage of what's on offer. And I do think that moon trine Jupiter should allow you to be successful in your own way without having to make too much of an effort. Now, talking about effort, we can't ignore the fact that today there is a T-square, that the sun in Taurus is on the Mars-Pluto midpoint. It kind of depends what you're doing. But, if you think about it, you've got sun in Taurus, your sign. It's moving to a square of Pluto. It's just come from a square of Mars. And so that suggests to me, Taurus, that there may be something that you take really, really seriously. And you're trying to relax. You're trying to be happy with that moon trine Jupiter. And things really can move your way. But still, there's something you're taking very seriously, and at times it might feel almost to be like a matter of life and death. And it's well, not literally life and death. Okay, I'm exaggerating, but Taurus, ask yourself, what is the most important thing to you? What's really important to you? And that T-square may reflect it, and you are capable of being incredibly stubborn. And I've already said this with the fact that the moon is square Pluto, but moon is square Uranus. Let me get that right. And so that T-square is really emphasizing what is important to you. And it's possible that T-square doesn't manifest if you're just having an easy, relaxed Tuesday and you don't feel there's anything you need to do. But if you feel there is something you need to do, and if you feel it is a bit of a fight, then that T-square could really kick into action. And you have to ask yourself whether it's worth being stubborn and how best to manage it. And it just could be, as I've already suggested, that if you're engaged in a battle, you don't necessarily have to involve other people. It may just be about doing things your way and not feeling the need to explain yourself. Gemini, it's a day when you should, as far as possible, be open to new possibilities. You don't have to accept things as they are. Things do change, and you shouldn't be of the view that you've absolutely got all the answers. You've got some of the answers, but you haven't got all of them. And now might be a good opportunity to be asking a few questions, asking yourself some questions. Have you really sorted it out? Have you really come to an absolute final conclusion? And quite possibly you haven't. And there may be, more questions to ask. And don't be afraid of going to places you haven't been before. And that's not literally about traveling to these places necessarily. It's just about trying to understand what's going on and playing with ideas. And so if you can have that sort of open-minded approach, then things should move relatively smoothly for you, and you'll be helped by the fact that the moon in Aquarius is making a trine to Jupiter in Gemini. Remember, Jupiter is still moving through Gemini, and it continues moving through Gemini until I think the beginning of June. So do take advantage of that, and things absolutely don't have to be difficult. Though Gemini, when it comes to other people, you are quite capable of coming over as being ever so slightly judgmental. And the word judgmental has negative connotations. One is not supposed to judge people. One is supposed to let people do whatever they want without criticizing them. But there is always a place for giving your opinion and, maybe passing judgment. And so if you don't approve of what another person is doing, then it's quite possible that you can transmit that disapproval, but in a constructive way. And they won't be offended. And it's all about the right choice of words. And perhaps you can suggest alternative courses of action. So if someone is absolutely set on doing something, you could say, well, that's all very well, that's fine, that looks good, but have you considered this? And so being judgmental isn't just about being negative. It also has a positive element, because you might be able to propose something something new. And if you can do that in the right way, I think your intervention could actually be very much appreciated. And looking at relationships in general, the moon is making a trine to Jupiter. That moon-Jupiter trine, as I've already suggested, is quite a good aspect, and that aspect can really help you get on with people, because you will give the impression of being relatively broad-minded. Yeah, you can be judgmental, but judgmentalism is not the whole story. You can be accepting of people how they are. You can certainly engage with them, and perhaps because you can get on with people, that means that you are able to be judgmental. You're not going to get a negative reaction. And overall, the various relationships in your life, I think, should be working quite well. And there are some people who really do think that you are wonderful. Cancer, today you are a little bit cautious, I think. You understand that few things can be taken for granted. Things can quickly go wrong, and you also understand that nothing is simple, and that there are always going to be complications lying sort of under the surface, and that's just something that Cancerians are very good at. They can see the larger emotional picture, and so that is going to be guiding your actions, and you're going to, in most cases, I think, you're going to err on the side of caution. Though in the process, as you manage today, you're quite possibly going to be relatively lucky. Things will just come together your way, and you'll just be in the right place at the right time, and you'll see the advantage, and you'll be able to take that advantage. And it's absolutely possible that no one will see you taking the advantage, so you can quietly strengthen your position, and there's probably no need to worry about rivalry and anyone thinking that you've been unreasonable. So that is a way to be strong. You're strong when you are unseen, and when you are unannounced, when you're maybe working in the shadows, and that reminds you that Cancer is a mute sign. It's a mute sign because crabs, crab being a symbol of Cancer, doesn't make a noise. The mute signs are the water signs. Fish, scorpions, and crabs are silent. Now, that doesn't mean you are a silent or a mute person, but today the muteness that is often associated with your sign does seem to be emphasized, and I think that is actually quite a good thing. And while you're going about your business, perhaps your private business, you will notice things, and you might notice things that you find surprising, even a little bit shocking, and it might be about other people's behavior, people doing things that you hadn't expected. Maybe people don't know they're being watched. They don't know that you notice, and you notice, and that might almost change everything. And so, yes, Cancer, today you are very observant, and because you're observant, you're able to start to get the larger picture, and that may change some of your attitudes, and it may change some of your attitudes towards certain people, or not just individual people, but but even towards groups of people. You can see how groups of people are behaving, and when you actually think about it, it is surprising, and that might create some change. You might, for example, decide that certain groups of people are not to your liking, or perhaps you want to stay away from them because you might feel that you can't necessarily trust them. But this is good, because it's all about knowledge, and it's about you learning things in your own private way, and as a result of this, you're becoming stronger. Leo, the moon continues moving through Aquarius, and Aquarius is, of course, your opposite sign, and so when you think of moon moving through Aquarius, you think about relationships and the other, and this is certainly something you are aware of, at least more than usual. And the moon, while it's moving through Aquarius, it does make two aspects. It makes a trine to Jupiter, and it makes a square to Uranus. If possible, Leo, you should be focusing on the trine to the trine to Jupiter, because moon trine Jupiter is a good aspect, and it might be that the right people can be very helpful and uplifting, and so don't feel that you necessarily have to do everything on your own, and being part of a right group of people is something that you should be happy about. And so don't completely ignore your friends and your associates, though that moon square Uranus might indicate that not everyone is to your liking, and that if you have friends, your friends might behave sometimes in a way that you're not entirely comfortable with. And additionally, we have a T-square today. The Sun is on the Mars-Pluto midpoint. So you've just had the Sun square Mars. You're just about to get the Sun square Pluto, so Sun moving to a square of Pluto. And right now we've got the Sun on the Mars-Pluto midpoint. And I do think that aspect could have a powerful impact on you. So, the question is, what kind of impact would that have? Well, Leo, you are a fixed sign, and at some level you do take yourself seriously, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And there are some things that are really very, very important to you, and it just may be that T-square really emphasizes how serious and intense things really are. And the Sun in Taurus, now that the Sun has gone in Taurus, it may represent your ambitions, everything that you would like to achieve. And with the Sun square Mars, I've already talked about Sun square Mars. I think that although it's quite a stressful aspect, Sun square Mars, I think it's quite motivating. And so Sun square Mars may really motivate you to make the most of everything you've got, and to really push your agenda in maybe quite a self-centered and selfish way, but maybe that's okay. Maybe it just has to be done. But then we've got the Sun not just making a square to Mars, but making a square to Pluto. And with this T-square, you might be aware of everything and everyone that is trying to hold you back. And this is happening at the same time as the moon is moving through Aquarius. And I've just said that moon in Aquarius is a time when you do have to think about the other and other people's impact on you. So you might actually become quite defensive, even a little bit confrontational, and you might assume the worst, for example, about other people's interventions, or even just about other people's presence. And you could be imagining things. So if you think that another person is holding you back, ask yourself, are you being realistic? Are they really holding you back? Or is it your imagination? Because sometimes when things don't work out, we're inclined to blame other people. We're not prepared to think about it as our own issue, as something of a psychological nature. And I'm not saying that's the case, but you just need to be open-minded here, because this T square, it's in fixed signs, and it could make you very set in your ways, and your focus may start to narrow. And with a narrowing focus, you may not be able to see the wood for the trees. And so don't be totally obsessed about yourself and your agenda and what you want to achieve and what is holding you back. It may be a little more complicated than that, and you may need to be quite self-aware here. And for all of us, self-awareness is important, but maybe at times it's especially important for a Leo, because Leo is a fixed sign, and you can see things in one way, but seeing things in another way can be hard work. But I do think that you can do it. And I should also say, with this Sun on the Mars-Pluto midpoint, it is stressful, but it's something you can use. There is no doubt, Leo, that you are in a very powerful position. You're someone that can absolutely make things happen through just willpower. Your willpower is really intense at the moment, and if there's something you want, then through your own efforts and your own struggle, you can actually make it happen. It might not be easy, might even be a little bit painful, but you can certainly make it happen. So if you're not satisfied with something, then within reason, you can change it, and you can create a situation that can completely work in your favor. You do have to ask in the process, what kind of damage are you going to cause? And you, Leo, you might be of a view, well, the ends always justify the means, but do they? So it's important to have a certain amount of morality here, because I think it is a situation where some Leos might lose touch, with what is right and wrong, and they might regard, the end result and getting your way as being the one thing that matters. Though maybe I'm exaggerating, but I'm really talking about the potential of your chart and what today could be like. But overall, Leo, I think it can be a very good day, and it's a good day because it's a powerful day, and if you use your power properly, you'll be fine. Virgo, you have opinions. You have quite definite opinions, and you know what's right, and you know what's wrong, and you know how everyone should behave, and you're probably not afraid of communicating those opinions if you have the opportunity. And so, from a social perspective, when you see what people are doing, when you see what friends, contacts, associates, partners, spouses, whatever they're doing, you have an opinion on that, and you're quite able to communicate that opinion. And you can be quite critical, and that is something that every Virgo can be, and in many cases it's actually okay to be critical if you're coming from the right place. If you are genuinely concerned, then telling someone that they're doing something wrong, it's okay. There's absolutely nothing to apologize about. But at the same time, you do need to exercise a bit of sensitivity, and you don't want to be too abrupt. And yeah, you could be. You just concentrate on one thing, and you just feel you just got to get that criticism out of the way. You don't prepare the ground, and then your criticism, might get a negative reaction. But that would be unnecessary. And perhaps what you should be focusing on at the moment, Virgo, is a trine aspect between the Moon and Jupiter. And this trine between the Moon and Jupiter really does help you get on with everyone, and you can be likable, but you can also demonstrate that you know what you're doing, that the kind of changes you're trying to create around you, which might have an impact on other people, that these changes are for the best. And provided you have a positive attitude, and you make some effort to explain yourself, then I think in most cases people are going to understand. Now, one word about your beliefs. I have suggested that you might have opinions about what is right and wrong, but it may actually go a little bit further than that, because we do have this T-square today. The Sun is on the Mars-Pluto midpoint, and it's going to affect all of us. It's not just you. And the question is, how does it affect you? And it might actually highlight, what you believe in. What you believe in politically, religiously, in terms of religion, spiritually, and you may actually realize that there are some things that you really do believe in, and you actually believe in them quite strongly, and you're not prepared to compromise. And it may just suddenly occur to you, you thought you were easy and flexible, but there are things called principles, and principles are subjective, and now it becomes clear to you. And so, Virgo, do look at what you believe in, and don't be too inflexible, but maybe just consider you've reached a point where your beliefs are starting to crystallize, perhaps because of what you've seen with your own eyes, what's going on in the world, what you're experiencing. It's all coming together, and it's not an entirely easy process, because I think it's a process which might, to some extent, pitch you against the rest of the world, may indicate how you might be different, but your perspective is different, and that might give you a certain separateness. But also it might occur to you, Virgo, that there are certain principles that might actually be worth fighting for. Libra, you can do things quite possibly on your own. You don't need any help. Not really. You've got everything you need, and if you concentrate on what's important to you, then you could actually today be pretty self-sufficient and just enjoy yourself in whatever way you'd like to. And if people are on your wavelength, that's fine, and they can share in the enjoyment. But if they're not on your wavelength, well, should you be bothered? I don't think you really should be bothered, because at the moment Libra, you may feel some estrangement from great chunks of the world, from sort of great chunks of society, and it's not a time where you feel a desperate need to be sociable, which is kind of unusual maybe for a Libra. Libra is supposed to be a sociable sign, but I don't think at the moment that you should really feel any pressure in that direction. And part of your lack of sociability may be actually a certain seriousness. You are able to enjoy yourself, but not in some vague, unfocused way. It's all about you, and it's about what you can do, and it's about understanding that your creativity really matters. And if you try to do things other people's way, well, it's just not going to work. And at the same time, your individuality could easily be compromised. So that's possibly the right approach. And underlying this, which you might not fully admit, is that there could be a certain desire for a result, and this desire is quite personal, and it might at times feel that it's a little bit irrational, but you want it anyway. Now, just because something is irrational doesn't mean that it's bad. Sometimes it's just, you just got to get it, and sometimes you might want to get something that is actually totally trivial, and it's totally trivial, but you just want it. And so, Libra, if you just want something, then probably you should do whatever it is needed to just get a hold of it. If it's that important to you, don't cause any damage in the process. Don't spend money in the process. But if it's really important to you, Libra, then what can I say? Well, you'd better just go for it. And in the process, other people can't entirely be forgotten. Don't forget that the Sun is square Mars, and that Sun square Mars may indicate powerful people, and Mars is opposition Pluto, and the Sun is Sun is not just square Mars, Sun is square Pluto. And so don't underestimate another person's strength. Some people have strong beliefs, strong views, and they want to be taken seriously. If you wander into their sphere of influence, so perhaps you should ask yourself, do you really want to wander into another person's sphere of influence? If you get really close to someone, then they could really be able to assert themselves, and you might feel that you're perhaps losing control. It's maybe like traveling through space. If you're traveling through space, you don't want to get too close to large bodies, large planets, because you might get sucked in by the gravitational field. Worse, I suppose, if you get too close to a black hole, you might get sucked in. So maybe you should steer clear of large planets and black holes as you travel through space, or powerful people who try to draw you in, who have their own personal dramas, and they want you to be part of those dramas, and that's not really what you want, is it? So, having said that, Libra, it might be a good idea to treat close relationships, or perhaps even any relationship, with kid gloves. Because relationships just could become too much of a good thing, and that just might be about people who have the potential to have just too much power. There's nothing wrong with powerful people, but when they have too much power, when they have power over you, and they're changing your routines, making you do things you don't want to do, well, that's not a desirable situation, and it is something to avoid. Scorpio. Scorpio, it's a day which, in its own way, is potentially quite intense. And you could say that things have been getting a little bit intense this week so far. It's Tuesday now, but we had a last quarter moon with the sun in where we had the moon square the sun, and then the Mars was very much involved with it. So we had sort of late on Sunday into Monday, we had moon opposition. What did we have? We had moon opposition Mars, and we had sun square Mars, and the moon has moved on, but we've still got sun square Mars, and we've still got sun square Pluto, and Mars is moving towards an opposition of Pluto. So Mars, your ruler at the moment, is very much in focus, and it just can't be avoided. And so it does make things intense, and it makes you potentially very determined. There are things you want. There are things you want to do, and actually there are things you really don't want to do. And so if you're in a mindset where you're taking things seriously, you need to just accept that, and maybe have some sympathy for other people, because with Mars opposition Pluto, and it could make you a difficult person to have around. You may not be easygoing, and with this T square, with the Sun square Mars, Sun square Pluto. Remember, Sun is in Taurus, and Sun is in Taurus is your opposite sign, and so you may regard other people as being a bit of a problem, and you may regard them as challenging, as a threat to your individuality, and not just that, as a threat to your desires and your ambitions. Because Scorpio at the moment, Mars has just gone into Leo. I think that you are actually quite ambitious, and there are things you want, and okay, you're prepared to be patient. You perhaps know that it's not that it's not a sprint, that it is a bit of a marathon, as they say. But still, you kind of feel that if you were to trust people, give people too much power, you might lose everything. And the question is that the right approach? And we're talking about a T-square, and when we're talking about T-squares in astrology, we're talking about an opposition which represents two principles which are potentially at war with each other. Mars opposition Pluto. Mars is you. You want things done your way. Pluto represents potentially a threat, something deep down that could be a disruptor that's holding you up, that could take things further. It could be something that could grind you to a halt, and you're aware of that, and you might be exaggerating it all, but it does feel important to you. And then with the Sun making a square to Mars, square to Pluto, you may then, in the first instance, think that there are certain people, certain groups who could just make matters so much worse for you, and it might be difficult to trust, and you might, in certain situations, misinterpret other people's actions. Now, it is possible that some people are a genuine threat, but it's also possible that you actually have to listen to what people are saying, try to understand their viewpoint, even if that's not what you want to do, because that might actually be the key to your success. And that's how one often sees T-squares in astrology. That planet on the T represents a key, and if you can turn that key, if you can make the most of that sun in Taurus, the other that you don't fully want to recognize, then you may actually find that what you thought was a problem is actually a major opportunity. So do consider that possibility, and don't assume a conflict. You could assume a conflict. You could assume that certain people are a threat to your security as well as your plans, but that's an assumption you shouldn't necessarily make. And so, Scorpio, it's very important today that you're reasonable, but you still have to be ambitious, and that's an important part of what it is at the moment to be a Scorpio, and to have things that you want, and you've got every right to want them. And what you should be trying to do is just make sure that you've got a sense of proportion, and that you are prepared to listen, to some extent. And people do have their views, and just because someone has a view that is different from your own view, it doesn't mean that they are a threat. And having an alternative view can be useful. Indeed, it can make the difference between success and failure. Sagittarius, you are enjoying Moon in Aquarius more now, because Moon is in Aquarius and it's making a trine to Jupiter, and so, of course, Jupiter is your ruler. So with Moon trine Jupiter, it's easier to get things done, and it's easier to get your message across. At the moment, you do want to get your message across. You have an individual way of looking at things, and you want people to know about it. And with the Moon in Aquarius trine Jupiter, that's very much something you can express. And if you have a light-hearted approach, I think people will listen to you, and people do actually need a light-hearted approach. If you've been looking at or listening to my forecast of the other 12 signs, at times I've suggested that things are a little bit heavy, because we've got this T-square, we've got Mars opposition Pluto, we've got Sun on the T, and it's really, really heavy, and people are perhaps taking things overly seriously. And sometimes what they need is a light touch. And Sagittarius, I think at the moment you can provide a light touch, helped by the fact that the moon is trine Jupiter. And the important thing is, not to take things too seriously, and not to be too self-conscious. You don't have to worry too much about what you're saying and what you're not saying. Politeness, niceties, does that really matter? For many people it does matter, but I don't think for you it necessarily does. If you're open and honest, and you're typically Sagittarian, then I think that you'll be creating the right impression, and you might be someone who people just regard as just a breath of fresh air. Now, this Sun making a square aspect to Pluto, square to Mars, and the Sun is on the T. Does it affect you? If it were to affect you, it might have a health impact. And when I talk about health, just remember I'm doing this in a completely general way. I'm not a medical astrologer, and even if I was to be a medical astrologer, I wouldn't be basing it just on essentially a sign forecast. Having said that, though, the Sun in Taurus, may indicate your own sort of health and well-being, and what those threats might be, and part of the threat is about things being too rigid, because Sun is square Mars, Sun is square Pluto. So something that is perhaps done in a repetitive way, you do something repetitively, and that can cause strain, or on a psychological level, perhaps taking something too seriously. It's not a time to be taking things seriously, but if you do find yourself taking things too seriously, that could have an impact on your health, when just something might just feel stuck, and that certainly might undermine your sense of psychological well-being. And so what you need, Sagittarius, is a certain amount of movement. If anything is stuck, and if you feel at all stuck over the course of the day, and you desperately want to do something and you can't do something, this shouldn't happen, by the way, because the moon is trine Jupiter. That should give you the movement that you need. But if for one reason or another you don't get that movement and you are feeling constrained, then at the very least that might undermine your psychological health. And so perhaps that is a reminder that you do need to have variety over the course of the day, and if you shouldn't just be focusing on a single activity, because if you do, that could undermine you. Capricorn, you are in the center of things. It might not feel that you're in the center of things. You might actually feel as if you're quite removed from everything, but actually you are, and you know what's going on, and you can very much feel the pace of life around you, and it's a pace of everything going on in the collective. It's the pace of your social life, what people are doing. You understand it all, you get it all, and you just have this overview, which might give you a certain amount of power. Not power like power that you're kind of throwing around and you're being a dictator. It's not like that. You just feel that you understand it all, and no one's going to push you around. No one would dare push you around. I mean, even if people tried to push you around, it just wouldn't work, because you get everything, and in a way you feel a sense of just quiet harmony. You might not feel particularly good about the harmony, but it just might be something very natural, and this is going to be reflected by how other people treat you. At the moment, a lot of people are feeling tense. We are living in a tense world, and we've just got this T-square. I've been talking about this astrological configuration. We've got Mars opposition Pluto, and we've got Sun square Mars and Sun square Pluto. And maybe in tomorrow's video I'll be going into more detail about this T-square, because it's still around. But it's not your problem. It's other people's problem, or at least other people might regard it as their problem. And yeah, you understand it, and you're aware of it, and you actually have your own solutions, and because you're able to get a perspective. The question is, are people ready to listen to you? If they are, I think they would very much benefit. And additionally, you may feel that you actually have a role, and at first you may not feel that you're actually able to perform this role. It may seem to be just too much effort. But if you have a clear idea, Capricorn, about the kind of role you should be performing today, then it's the idea that matters. And that idea, through a bit of internal struggle on your part, really trying to bring this idea down to earth, and kind of you make it real in yourself first, and then you can start to project it. And as soon as you start to project this role, yeah, it could be a little bit of a struggle, could be a little bit of effort. It won't be entirely easy, but as soon as you start to do that, everyone will recognize it, and that does actually give you a great deal of power and influence. Again, it's not the kind of power that is going to damage anyone. You are a great force for good today. And additionally, if we look at things from a relationship perspective, you might, for example, have ideas about how you should be getting on with certain other people, and through your own effort, you and your own vision, you can make things work out pretty much as you imagine. So don't forget your own willpower, because at the moment, Capricorn, your willpower is very, very strong, and it can almost move mountains. Aquarius, it's actually quite a powerful day. It's a day when your sign is strongly configured, because we've got this build up towards a Mars-Pluto opposition. Pluto is moving through your sign. Mars is opposition Pluto, and the Sun is on the T. Sun is halfway between making a square of Mars and a square of Pluto, and it really gets you today. And so, Aquarius, it might feel right now that things are rather intense and single-pointed, and it really emphasizes the fixity of Aquarius. Aquarius is a fixed air sign, and ideally you are focusing on just one or two things, and you're giving it everything you've got, and nothing seems entirely easy. It's that kind of day. It is a little bit of a struggle, and the Sun, the Sun square Mars, Sun square Pluto can be about power and issues of power, and your power, how much power you got, could really be quite important to you. And you may feel that it is a zero-sum situation, that either you have the power or you don't. Either someone else is in control or you're in control. And so it's a matter of winners or losers. Are you going to be a winner, or are you going to be a loser? That might be how it feels. In reality, things are never quite that dramatic, and it's possible that everyone can be a winner. It's also possible that everyone can be a loser. But I think we should be focusing on the positives, and it's absolutely okay at the moment, Aquarius, for you to be taking yourself seriously, and considering what you want. What do you want? And if there is something you want, then it's absolutely reasonable for you to go out of your way to actually get hold of it. Though with this Sun square Mars and the Mars opposition Pluto, and Mars, remember, is at the beginning of Leo, and Mars in Leo represents a force that is quite unconscious. You see someone or something having power over you, and that's how it feels. And you might imagine that there is a threat. Yeah, you can see threats, left, right, and center. Now, some of these threats just do not exist. They are literally figments of your imagination. Or you may be over-interpreting something. And that is a danger today, Aquarius. You could take something which in itself is fairly minor, relatively trivial, and you could blow it out of all proportion, make it actually much larger than it actually is. And I don't think that would be helpful. And what you have to remember, Aquarius, is that right now you actually have the ability to get your way completely. There should be no opposition. If there is any opposition, you're quite able to deal with it. And so you don't assume a conflict where actually no conflict exists. And just remind yourself of your own grounding. That's what you need. Once you've got your 2 feet on the ground, remember Sun is in Taurus. Once you've got your 2 feet on the ground, then nothing can stop you. And if you do feel a little bit insecure, then ask yourself, what security actually means. And through sheer willpower, you can actually give yourself the security you actually feel you need. And so, don't ever feel helpless today. If something is missing, you can make it happen. You can create it almost out of nowhere. Pulling a rabbit out of a hat. If you need to pull out a rabbit out of a hat, if that's really important, then that's something you can do. So it's very important not to underestimate yourself, and also don't underestimate relationships, and don't underestimate other people, and don't think that particular relationships can't happen, can't work well. So if you have an idea about the way you and another person should be connecting with each other, and this idea might just be in your head to begin with, then you can actually turn that idea into reality. Now, I don't want to encourage you to have fantasies. Clearly, if you're not in a relationship with someone and you want to be in a relationship with someone, it's you can have all sorts of fantasies, but you can't necessarily have control over another person. But if you've already got a kind of a relationship with someone and you'd like this relationship to improve, then through your own act of will, you can actually create that improvement. So from a relationship perspective, if you're in any unsatisfactory relationships and you want those relationships to be better, or perhaps you want those relationships to disappear, then through your own willpower, you can make it happen. And it is a time, Aquarius, in terms of all your activities, where you should really appreciate how much power you have. And as I've already said, don't assume a conflict where no conflict exists. You can, in many cases, you can get your way without having to struggle. Pisces, you don't necessarily have to do anything, and you don't have to be part of the day's struggles. And in some ways, today is quite intense, because you've got this T-square, you've got Mars opposition Pluto, and Sun is square Pluto, Sun square Mars, and I've gone on and on about it when looking at some of my forecasts for the 12 signs. But I don't think it has much impact on you. It's not necessarily your problem, and maybe that's how you should see things. Other people have dramas, but I don't really think they're your dramas, and you don't want them to become your dramas. And so Pisces, having a clear set of boundaries, could be important. you don't want to, you do not want to take on other people's baggage. It's completely unnecessary, and you have got your own things to do, and ideally you will do things in your own way, at your own pace, and do think about what your role is. What are you supposed to be doing right now? Where can you be most useful? I mean, you know the answers to that, and you don't have to be told. And so, decide what your actual use is, to yourself and to society in general, and you can work on it. And you don't have to make a big show of it. You don't have to be sociable. You can actually keep a very low profile, and that's going to be fine, because it's really a time, Pisces, where you should essentially just be recharging your batteries and just preparing for something, but not fully being part of it at the moment, because I just don't think it's necessary. And if you were to try to have an impact, I think you would feel out of place, because you would almost be turning up at another person's party uninvited, and that's something you don't want to do. Even if you are invited to share another person's problems, if you do want to share another person's problems, you're still going to feel you're going to be a stranger, and you're probably not going to feel that you can actually do anything particularly useful. And so, Pisces, that might be the best approach. Though, do listen to what you're told. There may be a little bit of a criticism in some quarters, or constructive criticism. So if you are at the receiving end of constructive criticism today, then do take it with good spirits, because it's meant well, and you may be reminded of something that you'd forgotten, and it was an omission on your part, and if it's pointed out, you should be grateful for the correction. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And now I want to look at the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Tuesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 8, which is holding together. And it's a very collective hexagram. It is about people coming together, having a common purpose, and it reminds us of, was it Benjamin Franklin who said, we either hang separately or we hang together. I think he was talking about the American Revolution. And so we don't have to do everything on our own. We are living through stressful times, and today I've gone on and on about this T-square. You've got what was it? You had Mars opposition Pluto, and you've got the Sun making a square to both those two planets, and it just might all feel a bit stressful. And some of us might feel that we're dealing with things on our own, and it's a solitary struggle. But we don't have to take things so seriously, and we don't have to feel that we are alone. We can get help, and things are going to work better when we are in a group, when we are cooperating with other people, when we know our place. It's not about the ego. That's a problem with holding together. What blocks holding together is everyone feels they've got their own personal struggle, and they regard things as important. It's their own life. It's me, and that's not the way of dealing with today. And so, if you can hold together, if you can ask yourself, who can help you? And indeed, it works the other way around. Who can you help? And there might be a sense of mutual assistance and people talking things through, and that's the best approach. Now, it may not always be relevant. Some people might just be on their own. They might physically be on their own. Of course, you've always got the internet, and you can connect with people and get advice on various forums. So it's very difficult to be entirely alone. And of course, if you are watching this, that means you've got the internet or you've got a cell phone. So you are not alone by the very fact that you are watching me. So you must have some connection which you can actually use. And even if you are alone, you just kind of need to feel that you're not alone. That whatever you're battling with, other people are battling with it as well. And that is often the case, isn't it? When we start to worry about something, I don't know if you've noticed this, that when you start to worry about something, you then find that other people are actually worrying about it at the same time. That might be because we're just tuning into the collective. And as far as specifics are concerned, we do have one moving line, and that moving line, the second line moving, does indicate that there is no harm in putting oneself under another person's authority, provided the circumstances are right. It's not about losing power. It's just perhaps accepting that in this particular case, another person may know more than us, and that their well-meaning constructive directions should perhaps be followed. And we have to get the balance right. It's not about always doing what we're told. It's not trying to humble ourselves and to submit to authority. It's not like that. It's all for a common purpose, and because it's a common purpose, we can all benefit. Now we've got a moving line here. Second line moves, so that means we move to a second hexagram, and the hexagram we move to is hexagram 29, which is the abysmal. Now, the abysmal doesn't sound good. You have got the abyss over the abyss. So you've got the two trigrams, one over the other, and these trigrams, this trigram, represents the aspect of water that relates to the abyss. In the I Ching, there are different ways in which water can be perceived. You've got another trigram which relates to the lake, but this is about the abyss, and it is about danger. It is potentially about falling into the abyss, and this perhaps gives some context to the previous hexagram, which was holding together. Why do we need to hold together? Well, we need to hold together because there is potentially some danger out there, but the danger that the abysmal represents is a danger that we've seen before. This is not an unfamiliar danger. We've managed it in the past, and it is about letting things flow. Things have their own momentum. You let gravity let gravity do its work, and if you allow the flow, then no one is going to get hurt, and we'll be able to get round the issue. And so if you are confronted with a danger or a difficult situation, don't panic. You have to be careful, but it's not completely unfamiliar ground. You know what to do, and you know that it's not something that you can force. You might have a problem, and you might be tempted to sort it out straight away, to sort it out quickly. But that's not the right approach. You need to let things develop in their own course, and let the problem resolve in its own way, and use your own experience and your knowledge and your instincts, and then you'll get round the danger. And I think this danger is reflected by what's happening astrologically. This Mars, Pluto, Sun, T square. It is. We are living in difficult times, but we're going to get through it. It's going to be okay, and don't feel that you're alone. And now it's time to talk about the Pope, the late Pope, who died today at the age of 88. I think it's absolutely reasonable to talk about this. I was wary of. I was wary about talking about the possibility of his death when I looked at his chart quite recently after he got sick. As I said, I think I'm a bit uncomfortable about kings, queens, popes. There's a tradition in astrology that you should not speculate about what happens to these people. It just seems to be potentially unfortunate. Strangely, it seems to be okay to talk about prime ministers and presidents, whether it's Macron or Trump. I think I can speculate all I like about Macron and Trump and so on, but popes and even the King Charles III, I'm still a little bit uncomfortable. I don't know why that is. Maybe it's just me just plugging into the tradition here. But anyway, the Pope has died, and let's start off by looking at the chart of the announcement of his death, not the announcement of his death, the time he died. So let's look. So here is a chart of his. I had his death. Where's his death gone? I've lost his death. Here is his death. So he died at 7:35 a.m. I mean, this is what the Vatican reported. I think I looked at the. It said I think this was from an AP report, and it said. At 7:35 this morning, the Bishop of Rome, Francis, returned to the home of the Father. His entire life was dedicated to the service of the Lord and of his church, and that was said by Cardinal Kevin Farrell, said from a chapel of the Domus Santa Marta, where Francis lived. So 7:35 is when he died, and it is quite a powerful chart. So when I was looking at Monday's horoscope, what was going on Monday, I mentioned the fact that there was a last quarter moon. Okay, that last quarter moon would have been late on Sunday if you're in the Americas. So that last quarter moon was at about one degree Aquarius. So 1 degree Aquarius, and the moon was square the sun at 1 degree Taurus, and of course Mars was involved there. You can see that last quarter moon here in this chart, and Mars is involved now, and Pluto was involved as well. So at the time of the Pope's death, there was a very close Moon-Pluto conjunction on the midheaven, and Mars was very close to the IC, and the Sun was making that T. So in fact, that T square that I've been talking about in this video, now, talking about how it's going to affect the 12 signs, it was clearly in operation at the time of the Pope's death, and it was being triggered by the moon. So the moon was conjunct Pluto, the moon was opposition Mars, the moon was square the sun. So most importantly, it was hitting the midheaven, and so the midheaven was the final trigger. When the moon was exactly on the midheaven was when the Pope died, and that makes sense astrologically, almost quite predictable. I think if I had really tried to focus on this and the Pope, and that was what I was really interested in, one could almost have highlighted something major happening here. I mean, I was thinking about this T square, you were thinking about accidents and disasters, but this is the death of a Pope. He was I mean, he was 88 years old. I mean, okay, he could have died. Sorry, he could have lived for a lot longer. I mean, 88. People, there's no reason why he shouldn't have lived into his 90s. But anyway, he died at 88, and 88 is not regarded as being a particularly young age to die. And we thought he'd got over his illness, but from this chart, that sort of indicates to me that it's actually, a major event. I mean, I know that a pope dying is a major event. In my lifetime, I remember in 1978, I remember the popes dying, and when John Paul II was elected, I remember John Paul II dying in when was it? Just over 20 years ago, because it's almost exactly 20 years ago. I think he died at the beginning of April 2005, John Paul II. So popes dying, it's a memorable event, even if you're not a Catholic. But this event, it does feel a little bit nasty. Now, there's nothing nasty about it for him, but for society and who is going to replace him as Pope, it really is difficult with this Moon Pluto conjunction, opposition Mars, and additionally, at the time of his death, we had Uranus on the ascendant, and Uranus is conjunct Algol, and the ascendant was conjunct Algol. So Algol is an evil star, and one doesn't necessarily associate that with the death of an 88-year-old man. I mean, we knew, particularly a man who we knew he'd been very ill. We knew he'd almost died over the last few months, and so, why? That's a question. I don't necessarily have an answer for that, but I do find that strange. Why it is such a dramatic chart, and that may say something about the papacy, and it may say something about the dramas that are now going to unfold as you have this struggle to elect a new pope, and things have changed. He was elected. He was elected, I think, in 2013 when Neptune was in Pisces. Neptune is a planet of spirituality. And so it does say something about people's religion and what's going on with people's religion and what's going on in society with religion. And Neptune was in Pisces when he was elected. Now the new pope is going to be elected with Neptune in Aries. Neptune in Aries is Neptune's spiritual planet in Aries. This is going to be potentially quite a dramatic choice. It's perhaps about the church asserting itself and maybe asserting its dogmas as well. I mean, things are happening with religion across the board. I mean, the Catholic Church aside, it is relevant to the Catholic Church. I read these reports about the United Kingdom, and I have said, if you've listened to me talk about England and religion, that England the UK is supposedly an atheist country. I mean, that's what I thought. People are, certainly from Christians, are giving up religion. But then I saw these reports that church attendance in the UK is massively increasing, particularly amongst young men. And you could speculate about why that is. People perhaps need things to be more definite. This could be a response to the rise of other religions in the UK, that people of a Christian background feel that they need to assert their cultural identity. I mean, the humanist society in the UK was very sceptical about this. But of course, the humanist society would be sceptical about it. But it is very interesting. It would be very interesting if church attendance in the UK really is increasing, and it's particularly strong amongst Catholics in the UK. So it's quite possible that Catholicism is having and Christianity as well is having something of a rebirth. But it will be interesting to see what happens with Neptune in Aries and what kind of pope the church chooses. And so, of course, there is the question of what transits was Francis experiencing when he died. So here is Pope Francis's chart, and so Francis was 88 when he died, and notice how he has Uranus on his midheaven, and so there is something dramatic about him, about his presence, and Uranus was on the ascendant when he died. Also he, in terms of his perfection, so he was 88 when he died. So that means that if you take perfections, that means that his perfected ascendant was Scorpio. So so he's got 88. So we count sort of, that's 84, 85, 86, 87, 88. So Scorpio's relevant there, and that means that there is a focus on his Mars, and on his Mars in Libra. So his annual ruler since his last birthday was Mars in Libra. Okay, you might say that Mars in Libra is it's not a great place for Mars to be. Mars is in its detriment, so that does potentially put him under a certain amount of pressure. But we'll be looking at Mars a little bit later. Well, in fact, right now, when we look at the actual transits, so we would maybe expect a transit to his Mars when he dies. I mean, that is a possibility, given how important Mars is, because Mars is his annual ruler, if you're into perfections. So as far as the transits are concerned, the things that were going on in his life, transiting when he died. So Jupiter was at 1928 Gemini. So in other words, Jupiter was 3 arc minutes from the trine of his Mars. So Jupiter trine Mars, I mean, that's quite a nice aspect. But it's an important aspect because Mars is his annual ruler. And so Jupiter trines, you see that so often in death. Jupiter is often seen as an indicator of an easy death, and in general, Jupiter is death. It's about release, and so although Jupiter is supposed to be a fortunate planet, it's in this case and in many other cases, it's just such a common thing in astrology to see Jupiter trines linked to death. So Jupiter, you could say that Jupiter trine Mars was really the main transit he had when he died. I mean, there are a couple of things you might other thing. Well, not just the main thing. There is another thing which is even more important. You could say is his midheaven. So Pope Francis's midheaven was at 0 degrees Taurus. So as the sun crossed his midheaven, he died. And of course, you could see that Mars was square his midheaven, and the moon and Pluto were also square his midheaven. So what that meant is that that T square involving Sun, Mars, Moon, Pluto, it all hit the midheaven. And the midheaven is an angle that one doesn't normally associate with death. It's more about direction. Now you might want to say that if you look at it from a spiritual point of view, and you go back to the way his death was announced, you could, if going back to what was said, at 7:35 this morning, the Bishop of Rome, Francis, returned to the home of the Father. You could say that is about direction, returning to his home, if you want to be completely spiritual about it. And the I see is what is missing in that. So you've got the sun on his midheaven, you've got Mars in his first house, transiting his first house, hitting his midheaven. You've got Pluto and the moon in his seventh house hitting his midheaven, and sort of the empty point is the I see. And I suppose you could say that is his home, or it's just his direction, where he feels that he's going. And of course, if you're the Pope, your next stage is to return to your Father, is to go to heaven. So that might be a way of looking at it. It's also, this chart for the Pope in a way is the Catholic Church. He is the head of state of the Vatican, and if the king is the land and the land is the king, this is saying something about what it means for the Catholic Church for him to be dying. And of course, the moment he dies, he's no longer the Catholic Church. So at that moment of death, it all comes together. And this may just indicate something not just for Pope Francis, but for the whole direction of the organization. So I'm thinking, especially given Neptune moving into Aries, that this transition from one pope to another is going to be absolutely major, and we may see a really important change in the Catholic Church, and it may be that the Catholic Church is going to be more assertive. You have to be assertive with Neptune in Aries. Neptune in Aries, by the way, is about clarity. You're very definite about what you want and what kind of society and what kind of faith you are looking for. And so that may be what this transition from one pope to the next is all about. Now, the Pope, he had a solar return, and so here is the Pope's solar return, set for his birthday, obviously. Now, and this is set for Buenos Aires, where he was born. Now, when I do solar returns, I like to set it for where someone is born. I use tropical solar returns, and I usually concentrate on where someone is born rather than where someone is at the time of their birthday. And I would argue that this solar return is actually quite descriptive, because you have got sun rising, so this is an important solar return for him. This sun is square Neptune, so there was a sun square Neptune at the time of his death. At the time of his birthday, of his last birthday, when he turned 88 on December the 17th, 2024, or around then. And so that Sun-Neptune square it's on his ascendant. And additionally, the moon is at 21 Cancer. So the moon is exactly on his eighth house cusp. So again, that is descriptive of his death, certainly after the event. Would I have said that definitely means he's dead before the event? Well, you could have seen it in different ways. You could have said that this return might have been about him resigning, but the moon is in the 8th, and certainly once he became ill, you looked at that, you are very ill, in fact. That moon in the 8th might have suggested that potentially, his days were numbered. So that is certainly a way of looking at it, and so that's his solar return set for Buenos Aires. You're probably interested, if we relocate it to the Vatican City, is it Is it more descriptive? It gives us a different view. I mean, if you do this, I mean, I assume he was in the Vatican City or around about at the time of his birthday. This is a relocated solar return. Okay, Pluto's rising, and Mars is in. So you have a Mars-Pluto opposition at the time of his solar return, and of course he died on a Mars-Pluto opposition, and you could say that this is all sort of linked up with true Black Moon Lilith. His relocated solar return has Moon in the 6th. His birth solar return set for Buenos Aires has the Moon in the 8th. So the relocated solar return is saying that he's sick, Moon in the 6th, whereas the Buenos Aires birth solar return is indicating that he might die. And Uranus is on the IC, Pluto on the ascendant, Uranus is on the IC. So that Uranus on the IC, it's quite a shocking year. So what I'm saying or suggesting by looking at these two solar returns, one solar return for him for where he was born, Buenos Aires, and another solar return for where he was at the time of his birthday, I'm kind of not saying you should just use one or the other. Maybe you should actually look at both. So don't feel that you have to use the birth solar return or you have to use the solar return for where he was born. I think in a way both of these returns are quite descriptive. And finally, I want to look at Pope Francis's solar arc directions. And I'm not saying that anything particularly dramatic is going on here. So here are his solar arc directions, and what was so solar arc direction. He's 88 years old, and so we would move all the planets 88 degrees approximately, and what we actually find is that this is actually the planets had moved using solar arc actually pretty close to 90 degrees. So all the planets, because at 90, he's coming up to his 90th birthday quite soon, all the planets have moved approximately 90 degrees. So at around the age of 90, every planet in your natal chart by solar arc direction makes a square to itself. And this is something we can see. So his natal Saturn is at 1630, and so solar arc directed Saturn is at 1556. Sorry, natal Saturn at 1630 Pisces, and solar arc directed Saturn at 1556 Gemini. So Saturn is making a square to itself, and everything is kind of making a square to itself. One solar arc direction that perhaps we should look at is his solar arc directed midheaven. So his solar arc directed midheaven is on his Pluto, and so the midheaven, I mean, again, it's not exactly there. It's 1 degree off, but we don't have an exact birth time for Pope Francis. It's just 9 a.m. He could have been born later, he could have been born earlier. So approximately, we've got his solar arc directed midheaven on his Pluto, and that, of course, represents the change in his career, the change in his status, and the fact that he has moved on. So that potentially is something that we should be considering. So I think that's all I'm going to say about Pope Francis. I'm sorry he's dead. If you're a Catholic, my condolences. It did sort of fit, and I think what's particularly interesting are the transits to his midheaven. Pope Francis' midheaven really was hit in a serious way by that T-square, and I do think that may say something not just about Pope Francis. I think that may say something about the future of the Catholic Church, and perhaps what kind of struggle is unleashed now as the Catholic Church tries to find a tries to find a new pope, and we'll soon find out. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be very grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.